London, 1857. Cold rain fell hard on the stone streets of Mayfair as Elalina Bennett walked with tired steps and a thin shawl pulled tight around her small frame. Each drop of rain felt like a reminder of how low her life had fallen. She was only 23, yet sorrow and loss already sat heavy on her heart. Her father had been a country doctor who taught her how to care for the sick and weak, but after his death she came to London with hope that was quickly crushed. She had lost her last position when she refused the unwanted touch of her employer. Now she had no work, no safety, and only a few coins left. By the next morning she would be forced from her room if she could not pay her rent. As she passed the bright homes of rich families, large carriages splashed dirty water on her skirt. The people inside did not even look at her. To them she was only part of the street, something easy to ignore. Her stomach ached from hunger and fear as she counted her coins again. They were not enough. She stopped when she heard shouting near a grand house with tall doors and glowing windows. 2 footmen were carrying a man down the steps. He was pale and shaking, his face tight with pain. An old butler cried out for a doctor. The doctor was away, and no one knew what to do. Before Elalina could stop herself, she stepped forward. She told them that her father had been a doctor and that she had helped him for years. The butler looked at her with doubt and anger. A woman could not be trusted, he said. But the sick man lifted his head and looked straight at her. His gray eyes were sharp even through his pain. He said he did not want to wait any more. He ordered them to let her try. Within minutes, Elalina was inside a rich bedchamber that made her feel like she had entered another world. The man was the Duke of Westmoreland. His coat was off and he lay on a large bed, breathing hard. He showed her an old wound on his leg, a mark left by war. It was swollen and red. She worked with calm hands, making a simple paste from what she found in his cabinet and giving him something for pain. She told him that the wound was infected and needed care through the night. The Duke studied her closely. Then he offered her something that made her heart race. He said she could stay and treat him for 1 night and he would pay her £50. It was more money than she could earn in a year. She felt fear and shock at once. A young woman spending the night in a duke's private rooms could ruin her name. But without this money, she would lose everything. She agreed, but only on the promise that she would act only as his healer. He accepted her words, and the butler was sent away. As night fell, Elalina waited in a small room beside his chamber. Food was brought to her, but she could hardly eat. Her thoughts were filled with worry about what others might think if they knew where she was. After some time, the Duke called her. His pain had returned. She went to him and treated his leg again. He watched her with quiet interest and spoke of his mother, who had once cared for his wounds when he was a boy. She had died young, and his voice held sadness when he spoke of her. He asked her to call him Alexander when they were alone. She refused, saying it was not proper. Still, there was something gentle and lonely in his face that made her feel close to him in a way she did not expect. As the hours passed, his fever grew worse. She stayed by his side, cooling his brow and holding his hand when the pain became too strong. He told her about the war and how he had nearly died. He said sometimes he felt as if part of him never came back from that place. By dawn, his fever broke. He slept in peace while she watched over him. When he woke, his eyes were clear and his voice was strong again. He thanked her and gave her the promised money. The heavy pouch in her hand felt strange, as if it carried more than just coins. He asked her to return the next day to check his leg. She agreed, though she knew it was risky. When she left the house at dawn, a footman looked at her with quiet judgment. On the street she met Lady Holloway, the woman who had dismissed her before. Lady Holloway had already heard that she had left the Duke's home early in the morning. Her words were full of sharp meaning, warning Elalina that rumors could destroy her. Elalina defended herself, but fear settled deep in her heart. That evening she stood outside the Duke's house again, unsure if she should go in. In the end, her duty as a healer won. The Duke met her in his library, standing tall and strong. He thanked her again and spoke to her with respect that she was not used to. He told her that he had learned about her past and knew she had been treated unfairly. Then he offered her something she had never dreamed of. He wanted her to become the doctor for his estate in Kent with his protection. Before she could answer, Lady Holloway arrived, ready to make trouble. The Duke stood by Elalina, defending her honor and her skill. His strong voice made it clear that he would not allow anyone to shame her. As Elalina stood beside him, she felt fear and hope mix in her chest. Whatever came next would change her life forever. The carriage wheels of Lady Holloway faded down the gravel drive, leaving a heavy silence behind in the great drawing room. Elalina stood very still, her hands clasped in front of her, her heart beating so loudly she feared the Duke might hear it. The air felt charged, as if something fragile had been stretched to its limit and might snap at any moment. Alexander broke the silence first. His voice was calm, but there was a steel edge beneath it that Elalina had not heard before. He apologized for the scene, though his eyes burned with restrained anger. He said Lady Holloway would not trouble her again. He had made that very clear. Elalina nodded, but unease lingered inside her. The protection he offered felt powerful, yet dangerous. She thanked him and reminded him that she had only come to check his leg. Anything more felt like stepping onto unstable ground. They moved to a quieter sitting room. Alexander allowed her to examine his leg. The swelling had reduced and the skin was cooler. She told him the infection was improving, but warned that it could return if neglected. He listened closely, respecting every word, asking careful questions. No man had ever listened to her like this before. When her examination ended, Alexander surprised her by speaking again of his offer. He wanted her to come to Kent, to serve as physician to his estate in the nearby village. He spoke not like a duke giving charity, but like a man correcting a wrong. He said people depended on him, and they deserved real care. Elalina felt torn. This was everything she had dreamed of, yet the cost felt unclear. Living under his protection would tie her life to his in ways that frightened her. She asked for time to think. Alexander agreed, though disappointment flickered briefly across his face. That night, back in her small room, sleep would not come. Her mind replayed the sound of his voice, the steadiness of his gaze, the way he had defended her without hesitation. She also heard Lady Holloway's warning, sharp and cruel. Society was not kind to women who crossed its rules. The next day, she paid her rent and bought simple food. For the first time in weeks, she was not hungry or afraid of the next hour. Yet peace still escaped her. By evening, she found herself writing a letter to the Duke, then tearing it up. She wrote another, then another. None felt right. 2 days later, she returned to Westmoreland House. Alexander received her in the library again. She told him she would accept the position in Kent, but only under clear conditions. She would act only as a physician. Her independence and reputation must be respected. There would be no hidden expectations. Alexander listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded. He said her terms were fair and agreed to all of them. He even added that her work would be publicly acknowledged so no one could twist her role into scandal. His response eased something tight in her chest. Within a week, arrangements were made. Elalina left London behind and traveled to the countryside. Westmoreland Park spread wide with green fields, old trees, and stone cottages. The people there greeted her with cautious curiosity. A woman doctor was something new, and not everyone approved. Her early days were difficult. Some men refused her help. Some women whispered behind her back, but illness does not care for pride. Slowly, one patient became 2, then 10. A child with fever recovered. An old man breathed easier after her care. Word spread not through gossip, but through relief. Alexander was often away in London, but he wrote to her regularly. His letters were respectful, thoughtful, never crossing the line she had drawn. Still, between the lines, she sensed something deeper. Gratitude had grown into admiration, and admiration into something neither of them named. When he returned to the estate, they spoke in the evenings. Sometimes they walked the gardens. Sometimes they sat by the fire and talked of books, of ideas, of how the world might one day change. He never pressed her, never treated her as less than his equal. That, more than anything, unsettled her heart. Months passed. Elalina grew into her role. She was no longer the desperate woman walking through rain with empty pockets. She stood straight now, spoke with confidence, and made choices that mattered. Yet each time Alexander looked at her with quiet pride, she felt warmth bloom in her chest. One evening, news arrived that Lady Holloway would be visiting nearby. The old fear returned, sharp and sudden. Elenina wondered if this fragile piece could survive another challenge. As she stood at her window, watching the sun sink over the fields, she knew the next chapter of her life was approaching, and it would demand more courage than ever before. The morning Lady Holloway arrived at the nearby estate dawned bright and calm, as if the countryside itself refused to acknowledge the tension building inside Elenina. She stood in her small surgery, carefully arranging her instruments, though her hands trembled slightly. Months of hard work had earned her trust among the villagers, yet the shadow of society's judgment still lingered, ready to fall at any moment. Alexander found her there just after breakfast. He had returned from London late the night before, his presence steady and reassuring. He told her plainly that Lady Holloway had requested an invitation to Westmoreland Park. She claimed she wished to see for herself the great progress being made on the estate. They both understood the real reason. She wanted proof, something she could twist into scandal. Elenina straightened her shoulders. She said she would not hide. She had done nothing wrong. Alexander studied her with quiet admiration and promised that whatever happened, he would stand beside her as he had before. Lady Holloway arrived that afternoon in a fine carriage, her smile sharp and practiced. She was greeted with proper courtesy, though her eyes immediately sought Elenina. During tea, she asked polite questions that carried hidden barbs. How unusual it was, she said, for a woman to serve as a doctor. How fortunate Elenina must be to receive such generous patronage. Elenina answered calmly, speaking of her training and the needs of the people she served. She spoke of fevers broken, injuries healed, lives improved. The room grew quiet as she spoke, with confidence earned through months of work. Lady Holloway's smile tightened. When Lady Holloway suggested touring the village, Alexander agreed at once. He led the way, with Elenina at his side. As they walked, villagers greeted Elenina warmly. A mother thanked her for saving her child. An elderly man bowed his head in gratitude. Each word stripped power from Lady Holloway's cruel assumptions. By the time they returned to the house, Lady Holloway's tone had changed. She could no longer deny what stood before her. Yet she made one final attempt. She warned Elenina that society would never fully accept her, that her closeness to the Duke would always be questioned. Alexander responded before Elenina could speak. He said society had questioned him since the war, and that he had learned its approval was fragile and often hollow. He said he valued action over opinion, integrity over tradition. His words were firm and final. Lady Holloway left that evening with forced politeness and no victory. When her carriage disappeared down the drive, Elenina felt a weight lift from her chest. Still, something remained unresolved between her and Alexander. As weeks passed, spring deepened into full bloom. Elenina's work continued, steady and fulfilling. Yet her thoughts often drifted to Alexander. Their conversations grew more personal, their silences more meaningful. There were moments when they stood too close, when her heart beat too fast, when she felt the pull of something stronger than caution. One evening, after a long day, Alexander asked her to walk with him through the rose garden. The air was warm, filled with scent and soft light. They spoke of small things at first, then fell quiet. At last he stopped and turned to face her. He told her that the night she came to his chambers, wounded and desperate, he had seen courage in her that he rarely saw in anyone. He said her care had healed more than his leg. It had reminded him that he was more than a title or a burden of duty. Elenina listened, her heart racing. She told him how his trust had changed her life, how his respect had allowed her to become who she truly was. She admitted that leaving London, accepting his offer, had been the bravest and most frightening choice she had ever made. Alexander reached for her hand, slow and careful, giving her time to pull away. She did not. He asked if she believed that two people could build something honest even when the world disapproved. She answered that she believed courage was useless if it did not lead to truth. That was when he asked her to marry him, not as a rescue or reward, but as a partnership. He promised she would continue her work with his full support. He promised to walk beside her, not ahead of her. Tears filled Elenina's eyes as she looked at the man who had once been a stranger in pain. She thought of the hungry nights, the rain, the fear of being unseen. She thought of the lives she had touched, the purpose she had found. She realized that love, like healing, often began in vulnerability. She said yes. Their engagement was announced quietly at first. Whispers followed, as expected. Some praised their courage. Others shook their heads in disapproval. But life at Westmoreland Park went on. Patients still came. Crops still grew. Children still laughed in the lanes. On their wedding day, the village gathered in simple joy. There was no grand display, only sincerity. Elenina walked beside Alexander, not as a woman lifted above her station, but as one who had claimed her place through skill, compassion, and resolve. As they stood together, she understood that the fortune he once offered for a single night had never been the true bargain. What he had found instead was a partner who healed him as deeply as he healed her, and what she had found was a life shaped not by fear, but by purpose and love. Their story did not end there. It continued in quiet acts of service, shared burdens, and steady devotion. A love born from fragility had grown into strength, proving that even in a rigid world, hearts brave enough to defy expectation could change more than their own fate.